So when I've been at Google about 6 years, a little bit more than 6 years, and I came from the BBC. And in those days, you could see online basically our principles. We posted online 10 things we know to be true. And you can still find them online using any good search engine. But some of them still hold very true, and some of them raise a few eyebrows these days. So we still talk about things like focus on the user and everything else will follow. We still say fast is better than slow. But one of them is it's best to do one thing really, really well. And clearly, when you look at Google today, I hope we still do search really, really well, but we clearly do a wide range of other things as well. And sometimes that sort of makes people scratch their heads and say, what's the link between search and driverless cars? Well, I'll attempt to explain it now. So let's go way back to the beginning of Google. This is Google back in 1998. And if you search the words Google in 1998 using Google, you'll actually get the old-fashioned experience right from the beginning. And there's some interesting points here. You'll see that it looks pretty much the same as it does today. We lost the exclamation mark along the way. Yahoo kept theirs. But I don't know if you can read the small print, but it says there, index contains more or less 25 million pages, soon to be much bigger. And today, we index something like 60 trillion. That's 60 million pages, and we are crawling around about 20 billion a day just to keep up with the pace of change. But what really has changed in terms of the evolution of search is that in those days we were effectively bringing you 10 blue links. So when you put in your search term, we would aim to give you 10 websites that would contain the information that you were looking for. And a lot has changed since then. And here are a few landmarks. This is the famous search for Jennifer Lopez's green dress, which happened when she had attended the Grammy Awards in the year 2000. And it was at that stage, it was the biggest search we had ever seen up until that point. And it became clear to us that people were searching for Jennifer Lopez's green dress, not because they wanted more information about it, but because they wanted to see her more or less in her green dress. And that's what led to the creation of image search. So when you do a search for that, sometimes you are looking for an image rather than information. More seriously, a similar principle led to the establishment of Google News. That was on 9/11. A search for the World Trade Center on 9/11 clearly wouldn't have brought you information about what was going on that day. So that was what led to the creation of Google News. Similar thing goes on in maps. Again, we're trying to get you very, very quickly to the answer that you are looking for. So I've done a search there in maps for Intercontinental Park Lane, and I'm getting a great deal of information right there on the front page. So I'm getting the map, the location, the directions, the address, the telephone number, the cost per night, which I can tell you is £304 per night, and indeed reviews about whether it is worth the money. And then with one further click, I can see a picture of the Intercontinental Hotel. So when I've followed my directions, I can decide when I've got there. So again, quite sophisticated questions where, again, we're trying to bring you the full answer, the answer you're looking for directly. But it's still work in progress. It's by no means a solved problem. So the kinds of questions that we are increasingly being asked are things like, where can I get a cheap flight to in December where it's sunny and I can do snorkeling? Now, that's a perfectly reasonable question. You might say to a friend, that's what I want to do. To a search engine, it's a more difficult question. But that's the kind of question that increasingly we are trying to answer. Not there yet, but we're on the case. And of course, as has been said in the last couple of sessions, we're moving extremely fast towards a mobile world. And of course, in mobile, it's a different proposition. On desktop, you're searching, typing in your searches. On mobile, much harder to type. And you might want to interact with your phone in different ways. So there's two big new evolutions that we're looking at in terms of how we give people the answers they're looking for on their mobile device. How many of you are using Google Now? Familiar with Google Now? a few. Well, you can get, if you're not using it, you can get to it very easily by updating the Google Search app. And what Google Now is effectively is search without searching. So based on a lot of information that comes from your device, where you are, for example, what is in your calendar or in your email, what you've been searching for, we can suggest to you information we think is useful to you given the time and place. So I did that, did a quick swipe on Google Now the other day, and that's the information that came up. So it's telling me that I'm an hour and a half away from my office, and it'll give me information about traffic congestion, etc., suggested routes that I might take to get there. It says that it's one of my friend's birthdays today. In fact, that's my new boss's birthday, so that's a particularly helpful piece of information. It tells me the weather in London. It's cloudy and rainy, no surprise there, and then gives me information based on my interests. So information there about Google self-driving car. Google self-driving car have been involved in 11 accidents. The next sentence goes on to say, but it wasn't their fault. And the last bit there, some information about BBC Newsnight. I used to work at Newsnight. I watch the program pretty regularly, and it's picked that up, and it's pushing me information about Newsnight. So that is really search without search in Google Now. The other really big development is around speaking to your phone, and indeed having your phone speak to you. So let me show you a little film which shows what we're doing in that area.
Kids this year getting an average of $3.70 per lost tooth. Bryce Canyon is 29 minutes from your location.
I just want to tell you, it gets better.
There we are. So you can talk to your phone and have it talk to you. And perhaps the most striking thing there is that the cost of a tooth from the Tooth Fairy is $3.70, which seems highly inflated. But of course, everything I've been talking to you about so far is the evolution of search, the incremental improvement of search. And we're making round about 1,000 improvements to Google search in the course of every year. But the other big thing, which is a real obsession with Larry Page and others, is that to see real improvement in terms of technology, to see real innovation that changes millions of people's lives around the world, that tends to happen in big technological leaps forward. So at the same time, we're always trying to incrementally improve our services, but we're also trying to take big leaps forward. Now, this picture shows the situation which used to exist in Google's offices in London back when I joined, going back 6-7 years ago. And those little trays there hold mobile devices. And when you walked into the office, you would see 50, 60 different mobile devices all plugged in. And I wasn't quite sure what it was at first. I thought it was people who were sort of charging their devices. But what it was all the different mobile operating systems that were there for our engineers to develop on. And it was a very, very complex world in those days, because you had so many different systems. And of course, one of the big bets that we put in place to really take the whole ecosystem forward was to acquire and then invest in the Android operating system, which has gone on to be the world's biggest. So there's a huge amount of emphasis at Google on the big bets that will make things ideally 10 times better rather than 10% better. And you'll be familiar with the Google X labs, which are sometimes described in the papers as the Google's secretive labs. And the X sounds very, very exciting and sort of X-Files-y. The X actually stands for 10, the aim being to make things 10 times better. So that really takes us into the next phase, And this is explained by what Larry and Sergey wrote about in their IPO founders letter back in 2004. Our goal is to develop services that significantly improve the lives of as many people as possible. And internally, we call that the toothbrush test. And the idea really is, can we build tools that are very simple to use, that will be picked up by millions, hundreds of millions, even billions of people around the world, and ideally used at least twice a day. So that's the toothbrush test. So some examples of the things that we're working on. The driverless car, obviously, probably the most famous thing to come out of the Google X lab. And this came from a question, really, which was, traffic congestion is terrible. I don't know how many of you have been or live in California, but clearly traffic congestion in California, truly terrible. Emissions are terrible, and indeed road safety, a particularly big problem. Something like the equivalent in the United States of an airliner crashing every week in terms of the number of deaths on the road. So the question that was set to our team was, could you invent something which would have the effect of halving the amount of congestion on the roads, halving the amount of emissions in terms of pollution, and halving the number of deaths on the roads in the course of a year? And the solution, perhaps the counterintuitive solution that they came up with was, well, actually, let's take the humans out of the equation and create driverless cars. And we know that 94% of all crashes are caused by human beings. So we announced last week that we've already been driving 1.7 million miles with the driverless cars, and we've had 11 accidents so far. But as we were at pains to point out, the accidents weren't our fault. They were examples of where people ran into the back of the driverless cars. But nevertheless, that remains a serious problem on the roads, because whatever you do and however carefully you drive, you can always be hit by somebody else. But the driverless cars, due to be on our roads in the States for rail within the coming months, a big technological leap forward. Next one is a project called Project Iris, and this is a smart contact lens. And the thinking there is, can we use monitoring of health data to make a really significant improvement in the area of diabetes? And again, diabetes, a huge and growing problem right around the world. And diabetes patients have to monitor their blood glucose levels very regularly during the course of the day. And the only way to do that at the moment is to prick your finger and test your blood in that way. And that not only it's sort of painful and inconvenient, but it can lead to infections. So the idea behind the smart contact lens is that you wear it in your eye. It has a very tiny sensor, as you can see, within the glass of the contact lens, and it can take regular readings of your blood glucose levels and let you know, perhaps by a message to your mobile phone, when your levels are getting out of kilter. We're testing that at the moment and partnering with the pharmaceutical company Novartis on that, and we really are very optimistic that there's great new opportunities there in terms of data and health. And the last one, and perhaps the most outlandish of all, is a project which we call Project Loon. And this involves floating stratospheric balloons on the edge of space, flocks of stratospheric balloons, and they float around beaming internet connectivity to remote parts of the world where there is no internet, or indeed to areas where there's perhaps been a disaster and internet connectivity has been lost. It was called Project Loon for a reason, in that it seemed particularly ambitious and unlikely, but actually this is one of the experiments that has been working particularly well so far, and we have had success in our trials of being able to beam connectivity to schools in Brazil and farmers in New Zealand with some success. So at the moment, again, as has been mentioned earlier, we have something like 2 billion people online with all the opportunities that access to all the world's information brings through mobile devices and through attempts at beaming connectivity, such as Project Loon, we are aiming to get the next 5 billion people online in the course of the next few years. And you can see the extraordinary advantages that will have for the developing world. And finally, I wasn't going to talk about advertising. Obviously, it's an advertising conference, but I wasn't going to touch on that very much, except to say that sometimes advertising gets a bad name. But all of these services are, of course, funded fundamentally by advertising. And whatever I've used an example of guitars there, which is my particular passion and interest. And sometimes people complain about being followed around online by things that they've searched for. Personally, I love to have a picture of a guitar following me around at all times. But I should, of course, point out that you can choose the advertising that you wish to have targeted at you, and of course you can opt out of that. So to sum up, I was going to show you one more quick film, and again, this tries to pull together a variety of the threads of the things that I've been talking about and explain how, over the course of the last 16 years, we've gone from Larry and Sergey working on search in their garage to where we are today. So here's a little film that I'll leave you with.
So let's go into the office. All right, so this is our garage. Basically, nobody's in here. Hi.
Hi. I mean, we were all a bunch of kids. We were, we were all somewhat idealistic in our own way.
I did not inhale.
We wanted to do things that made a difference in the world and that, that mattered, right? That were interesting and hard. We didn't start out as a conventional company, and we never followed a normal path.
What is our mission? Basically, we want to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful.
On the one hand, it was a perfect description of what we were trying to accomplish in search. And yet, it was also so broad as to leave the door open for all of the many, many directions we wanted to go in the future.
We set out to do something really useful for people, and all other things began to follow.
All right, so here we are in front of the elephants.
I don't think any of us possibly could have seen where this story was going to go.
It may sound nuts, but it's often easier to make progress on mega ambitious goals than on less risky projects. Few people are crazy enough to try, and those are usually the ones you want to work with.
What if distance wasn't a barrier to exploring our world?
Can we bring the internet to the 5 billion people who don't have it today?
What if everyone in the world could speak every language?
What if everyone could make a living doing what they love?
Everybody ready? Up, step, down, go.
Almost everything we do is an experiment in some way, shape, or form. Everything has some aspect of the unknown.
That didn't work at all, man.
You're probably going to fail a few times before you succeed.
And now the car is in control.
Google car in front of us.
We always tend to ask the question, how can we make it better? So there's always this sense of optimism and curiosity that you can make a difference.
If our ambition is to create products that have planetary impact, it's not good enough to just solve it for some people. You have to solve it for absolutely everyone.
The unifying theme, if there is one, is seeing something that doesn't work that well and trying to use technology to make it better.
Wow, I heard it. That is fantastic.
We want to get deeper into the problems that really matter to people and to the world.
Just because we've been successful in the past doesn't mean we're preordained to succeed in the future. That's why we need to keep on asking the big questions and work really hard to find the best answers